Spain, 1481. The air smells of orange blossoms, sea salt, and ash. It is the dawn of the Golden Age. Columbus is dreaming of the ocean. The Catholic monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella are uniting a broken kingdom. But beneath the gold and the glory, there is a war being fought. It is not a war of armies. There are no cannons. There are no battlefields. This is a war fought in the kitchen, in the cellar, in the bedroom. It is a war against memory. The Spanish Inquisition has been unleashed. Its goal is to hunt down heresy. But in 15th century Spain, heresy was not just about what you believed, it was about who you were. It targeted the Conversos, Jews converted to Christianity, and the Moriscos, Muslims converted to Christianity. Specifically, it targeted the women. Why the women? Because in Judaism and Islam, the home is a sanctuary. The rituals of life, birth, death, food, cleanliness are in the hands of the mother. When the synagogues were closed and the mosques were consecrated as churches, the faith did not die. It went underground. It hid in the linen chest and the cooking pot. And the woman became the high priestess of this secret religion. Today, we are going to open the files of the Holy Office. We are going to step into the terrifying world of the Conversa women. We will see how a change of sheets on a Friday could lead to a death sentence, how a refusal to eat pork could destroy a bloodline. This is the story of captivity, faith, and the terrifying price of a new identity. To understand the fate of these women, we must understand the atmosphere of terror. Imagine it. It is a Sunday morning. You are Beatrice, the wife of a wealthy merchant in Toledo. You are a new Christian. Your grandfather was Jewish, but you were baptized. You go to Mass. You wear the cross. You stand in the plaza as the Inquisitor reads the Edict of Grace, later the Edict of Faith. It is a list, a checklist of doom. The Inquisitor tells the crowd how to spot a secret Jew. If you see your neighbor wearing a clean shirt on Saturday, if you see a woman lighting candles early on Friday night, if you see a household cooking with olive oil instead of lard, if they turn their faces to the wall when they die. Beatrice listens, and her blood runs cold, because she does these things, not out of rebellion perhaps, but out of habit, out of tradition. The edict turned the entire city into a surveillance state. Your maid is listening. Your neighbors are watching the smoke from your chimney. Your own children are being questioned by priests. For a woman, the domestic sphere, her kingdom, became a minefield. Every domestic act was potential evidence. The Inquisition knew that men lived in the public square, but women lived in the home. If they wanted to root out the infected culture, they had to destroy the women. The arrest rarely happened during the day. It happened at night. The alguacil, the constable, and the familiars, lay officials, would arrive. There was no banging, just a firm knock. Open in the name of the Holy Office. Imagine the scene in the bedroom. Beatrice wakes up. She knows this moment. She has feared it for years. She is told to dress. She is not told why. She is not told who accused her. She looks at her children sleeping. She wonders if she will ever see them again. Inquisition procedure was designed to induce maximum shock. The assets of the family were immediately sequestered. The secular arm would inventory the spoons, the linens, the furniture. The woman was removed from her home, leaving her children destitute in a single hour. She is placed in a carriage or forced to walk, covered in a veil, to the Casa de la Inquisición. The heavy doors close. The world of the living ends. She has entered the secret prisons. The Inquisition prisons were not like modern jails. They were designed for incommunicado. The prisoner was not allowed to speak to anyone. Beatrice is placed in a cell. It is thick-walled. Sometimes it is underground, damp and cold. Sometimes it is high in a tower. She is alone. The first psychological torture is the silence. She does not know the charge. The Inquisition did not tell you what you did. When the jailer brings food, he does not speak. If she asks, "Why am I here?" he says nothing. The strategy was to force the prisoner to search their own conscience. Imagine the mind of this woman. She sits in the dark, replaying her entire life. Did I smile too much at the mention of Moses? Did I forget to eat the ham at the feast? Did the maid see me wash the blood out of the meat? She begins to confess to herself before she ever meets the inquisitor. She becomes her own accuser. While she sits in the cell, the Inquisition builds its case, and the evidence almost always came from other women. The files of the Inquisition are full of testimonies from maids. Servants were the eyes of the state inside the home. A maid might testify, "My mistress, Beatrice, always puts a clean cloth on the table on Friday evenings, and she never cooks eel." But the ultimate horror was the testimony of children. Inquisitors were skilled at manipulating children. They would ask a young girl, "Does your mother fast on certain days? Does she change her linens?" The innocent would say yes. That yes was a death warrant. When Beatrice eventually learns that her own daughter provided the evidence, the psychological break is total. The sanctity of the mother-child bond is weaponized by the state. The woman is not just a prisoner, she is a failure as a mother, betrayed by the fruit of her own womb. Who were these women really? The Inquisition called them Judaizers. History calls them crypto-Jews or Marranos, though this is a derogatory term meaning swine. They were women living a double life. Outwardly, they were perfect Catholics. They went to Mass. They counted rosary beads. Inwardly, they were trying to hold on to a fragment of their identity.
This phenomenon was distinctively female. The men, often active in business and public life, found it harder to maintain secret rituals. The women, masters of the kitchen and the home, could hide the faith in plain sight. Consider the Fast of Esther. This was a favorite among conversas. Queen Esther was a biblical figure who hid her Jewish identity to save her people. These women identified with her. They fasted for 3 days, praying for salvation. They would tell their servants they had a headache or a stomachache to explain why they weren't eating. It was a secret rebellion, a way of saying, "You can baptize me, but you cannot own my soul." But this resistance was fragile. One woman, Elvira del Campo, was arrested because she didn't buy pork from the butcher. She claimed she just didn't like the taste. The inquisitors didn't believe her. To them, taste was theology. If you rejected the pig, you rejected Christ. The Inquisition was cunning. They knew that solitary confinement could break a person, but sometimes they needed a spy on the inside. They would place a monitor in the cell with the accused woman. This monitor was another prisoner or a paid informant who pretended to be a sympathetic friend. Imagine Beatrice, weeks into her captivity. She's lonely, terrified. A new woman is thrown into her cell. This new woman cries. She whispers, "I am here because I kept the Sabbath. I am a Jewess in my heart." Beatrice, desperate for connection, desperate to trust, whispers back, "Me too." The trap snaps shut. The monitor reports the conversation to the inquisitor. This betrayal was devastating. It taught the women that there was no solidarity, no sisterhood. In the dungeon of the Holy Office, you were utterly alone. Finally, after weeks or months, the door opens. The inquisitors will see you. She is led to the audience chamber. a long table, a crucifix on the wall, 3 men in black robes, a scribe with a quill ready to record every sigh. They do not shout, they are calm, they are saving her soul. They ask the first question, "Do you know why you are here?" She says, "I do not." They say, "Search your memory. The Holy Office does not arrest the innocent." She falls to her knees, she recites the credo, she weeps, she confesses to minor sins. "I swore once, I missed Mass once." They shake their heads. "That is not it, daughter. Go back to your cell and remember." This game could go on for years. The goal was not just a confession, it was a full confession. They wanted the names of everyone she knew, her mother, her sisters, her cousins. They wanted her to dismantle her entire community. If the prisoner was stubborn, or if the evidence was strong but the confession was lacking, the inquisitors ordered the question: torture. We must approach this sensitive topic with historical accuracy. The Inquisition had strict rules. They could not draw blood, they could not mutilate, they could not kill during torture. But these rules did not save the women from agony. They allowed 3 main methods: the rope, the toca, and the rack. For a woman, the experience of torture was compounded by the shame of nakedness. She was stripped of her clothes, leaving only a small linen cloth. She was handled by the executioner, a strange man, in front of the inquisitors, priests. The violation of modesty was the first step of the torture. Let's look at the toca, the water torture. The woman was tied to a rack. A cloth was placed over her mouth and nose. Water was poured slowly into the cloth. It pushed the cloth down into the throat. It is the sensation of drowning. The body panics. The stomach bloats with water. All the while, the scribe is writing. She screamed. She invoked the Lord. She begged for mercy. But notice the transcripts. Often these women did not cry out to Jesus. They cried out to God in a generic way, where they stayed silent. The resilience of some of these women is astounding. We have records of women enduring sessions of the rack without giving up a single name. They protected their children. They protected their husbands. In the torture chamber, the weak sex often showed a strength that baffled the inquisitors. Eventually, pain or despair breaks most people. Beatriz confesses, "Yes, I lit the candles. Yes, I changed the sheets. Yes, my mother taught me." She thinks this is the end. She thinks she has satisfied the beast. But now comes the second phase. You have confessed your heresy. Now, to prove your repentance is real, you must name your accomplices. This is the moral event horizon. To save her life, she must condemn others. If she refuses, she's considered an impenitent heretic. The penalty is death by fire. If she names them, she lives, but she lives as a pariah, a traitor. Many women tried to navigate this impossible labyrinth. They named people who had already died. They named people who had fled to Portugal. But the inquisitors were smart. They wanted fresh names. And so the woman in the cell is forced to destroy her own world to save her physical body. While the Inquisition hunted the Conversas in the cities, a different tragedy was unfolding in the valleys of Granada and Valencia. Here lived the Moriscas, women of Muslim descent who had been forced to convert to Christianity after the Reconquista. For the Jewish convert, heresy was often hidden in the mind or the kitchen, but for the Morisca, heresy was written on her skin. The Inquisition didn't just attack their faith, it attacked their culture. It criminalized their very way of being. In 1567, King Philip II issued a pragmatic that essentially made being culturally Moorish a crime. For the women, this was a catastrophe. They were forbidden to speak Arabic. They were forbidden to wear their traditional silk veils, el almalafas.
They were forbidden to henna their hands and feet. They were forbidden to bathe. The Inquisition viewed the bathhouse, the hammam, not as a place of hygiene, but as a den of Islamic ritual. Cleanliness became a sign of guilt. Imagine the psychological impact. A woman raised to believe that washing before prayer is a holy duty is now told that to be a good Christian, she must remain dirty. The bathhouses were destroyed, the plumbing was smashed, and the Morisca women were forced to live in a state of physical and spiritual filth to prove their loyalty to the state. The persecution extended to joy. The zambra was a traditional dance performed by women at weddings. It was music, movement, celebration. The church banned it. They called it lewd and heathen. The Inquisition sent spies to weddings. Imagine a Morisca bride. She cannot wear her traditional dress, she cannot have henna on her hands, she cannot dance the dances of her ancestors. She must be married by a Catholic priest in a language she barely understands, Latin or Castilian, and she must leave her door open. Literally, the authorities ordered Moriscos to keep the doors of their houses open on Fridays and feast days so the old Christians could walk by and check that they weren't praying to Allah or cooking couscous. The home, once the private domain of the woman, was now a public stage. The Morisca woman lived in a glass house, constantly performing a pantomime of Christianity for the neighbors who wanted to steal her land. Just as with the Conversas, the Inquisition targeted the rituals of birth and death, and in Muslim Spain, the midwife was the keeper of these rituals. When a Morisca gave birth, she was supposed to have the child baptized immediately, but the Inquisition suspected, rightly, that these women were performing their own rites first, whispering the adhan into the baby's ear, washing the baby in a specific way. Midwives were dragged before the tribunal. Did you see the mother wash the child? Did she refuse the bacon broth we offered her after labor? The Inquisition tried to force midwives to become spies. A woman laboring in childbirth was vulnerable. In her pain, she might call out to Allah. The midwife was expected to report this slip of the tongue. It turned the birthing room, a space of female solidarity, into a courtroom. There is a darker chapter in the history of women and the church: solicitation. The Inquisition had jurisdiction over priests who used the confessional to sexually solicit women. While the Inquisition punished these priests, the records revealed the extreme vulnerability of the women. A conversa or Morisca woman was terrified of the church. She knew the priest held the power of life and death over her family. If she went to confession and the priest made advances, what could she do? If she refused him, he could accuse her of heresy. He could report her to the tribunal. She is a secret Jew. I smell it on her. The files contain heartbreaking testimonies of women who submitted to abuse out of sheer terror of the stake. They were trapped. To report the priest was to draw attention to themselves. To remain silent was to endure the abuse. The Inquisition archives are full of these silent crimes where the power imbalance was so total that consent was a meaningless concept. The interrogation is over. The torture is finished. The verdict has been signed. Now comes the auto de fe, the act of faith. This was not an execution, it was a pageant. It was the church showing its power to the world. For the woman in the cell, this is the day she re-enters the light. She is woken before dawn. She is given a special garment to wear, the San Benito. This was a yellow tunic made of rough wool. If she was reconciled, confessed, and spared, the tunic had a red cross, St. Andrew's cross. If she was relaxed, condemned to burn, the tunic was painted with flames and devils. She was also forced to wear a coraza, a tall, conical hat also painted. They were paraded through the streets. Imagine the sensory overload. Beatrice has been in a dark, silent dungeon for 2 years. Suddenly, she is in the blinding sun. The streets are packed with people. They are screaming at her, heretic, witch, Jewess. Stones are thrown. She is weak, stumbling. She walks in a procession of shame, holding an unlit green candle. She sees her neighbors, she sees her former customers, and she sees her children. They are in the crowd, watching their mother paraded as a monster. The shame is designed to be total. They arrive at the main square. The king might be there. The Grand Inquisitor sits on a throne. The Mass begins. A sermon is preached, usually about the rotten branch that must be cut off to save the tree. Then the reading of the sentences. This could take all day. The prisoners sit on a high bench, exposed to the eyes of the city. Beatrice hears her name. She is dragged forward. A clerk reads her crimes. She lit candles on Friday. She wore clean linen. She refused to eat pork. Every intimate detail of her domestic life is broadcast to the public. Her secrets are stripped naked. Then the verdict, reconciled. She collapses. She will live, but she will live as a pauper. Her property is confiscated. She can never wear gold, silk, or jewels again. Her blood is tainted forever. She is socially dead, but physically alive. But for the woman next to her, the verdict is relaxed to the secular arm. The church did not kill. That was their legal fiction. They relaxed or handed over the prisoner to the civil authorities with a request for mercy, which was code for burning. This woman, perhaps a stubborn conversa who refused to name her mother, or a Morisca who refused to eat pork, is taken out of the city gates to the quemadero, the burning place. We must confront the horror of this moment. If she repents at the very last second, before the fire is lit, she is granted mercy. She is strangled, garroted, before the flames touch her. If she refuses to repent, if she stays true to her hidden faith to the end, she is burned alive. The spectacle was designed to terrify the onlookers, but sometimes it backfired. The crowd watched a grandmother, a mother, a young girl, standing on a pile of wood, praying to her God with dignity. Instead of seeing a monster, some saw a martyr. This was the danger of the auto da fe. It showed the cruelty of the state in high definition. The fire dies down. The ashes are scattered into the river. The Inquisition wanted no relics, no graves. They wanted the person to be erased from the earth. But for the survivors, the reconciled, the punishment was just beginning. Beatrice goes home, but she has no home. It was sold to pay for her imprisonment. She has to wear the San Benito in public for a set time, months or years. When she walks down the street, people cross themselves and move away. She is a ghost. And when she finishes her penance, the San Benito is not thrown away. It is hung in the local church with her name on it. Beatrice de Luna, heretic. It hangs there for generations. Her grandchildren will walk into that church and see her grandmother's shame hanging on the wall. This was the statute of blood purity, limpieza de sangre. The stain never washes out. For many women, life in Spain became impossible. Those who could fled. They went to Amsterdam, to London, to the Ottoman Empire, to the New World. In these new lands, they threw off the mask. Women who had been Catholic for 20 years suddenly took Hebrew names. They lit the candles openly. They reclaimed the identity that the Inquisition tried to burn out of them. But they carried the trauma. We have letters from these exiled women. They speak of nightmares. They speak of the fear of a knock on the door. They created a culture of secrecy that lasted for centuries. Even in freedom, they whispered. Here is part 5 of the docuseries. In this section, we cross the Atlantic to the New World and explore the dangerous line between saint and heretic. The Inquisition did not only hunt those who denied Christ, it also hunted those who loved him too much, or rather, women who loved him in the wrong way. In the 15th century, a spiritual fever swept Spain. It was the era of the alumbrados, the illuminated ones. These were mostly women. They claimed they didn't need priests, they didn't need Latin, they didn't need the structure of the church to touch the divine. They claimed they could speak to God directly. To the Inquisition, this was terrifying. A woman who needs a priest is a subject. A woman who speaks directly to God is a rival.
We must look at the razor's edge walked by Saint Teresa of Avila. Today, she is a doctor of the Church, but in her time, she was investigated by the Inquisition. Her grandfather was a converso, a Jew. She had ecstatic visions, she swooned, she wrote books. The inquisitors watched her like hawks. One wrong word, one claim of prophecy that went too far, and the saint would have burned as a heretic. She survived because she was politically brilliant. She submitted to male authority on the surface while revolutionizing spirituality underneath. But for women like Francisca de los Apóstoles, there was no such luck. Francisca was a visionary in Toledo. She preached reform, she organized the poor, she claimed Jesus spoke to her about the corruption of the priests. The Inquisition crushed her. They didn't burn her for Judaism, they imprisoned her for feigned sanctity. They accused her of being possessed by the devil or simply of being a hysterical woman seeking attention. The message was clear: silence. A woman's spirituality must be mediated by a man. If she tries to bypass the hierarchy, she will be destroyed. And then there were the witches. We must make a crucial distinction here. In Germany and France, tens of thousands of women were burned for witchcraft. In Spain, the Inquisition was surprisingly skeptical. The inquisitors were lawyers. They believed in heresy, a crime of the mind, not magic, a crime of nature. They often dismissed witchcraft accusations as female delusions. But there was one terrifying exception: the Basque witch trials of Zugaramurdi, 1610. In the dark, mist-covered mountains of the Pyrenees, paranoia took hold. Women were accused of gathering in caves, the aquelarre, to feast with the devil. The Inquisition intervened, and for a brief moment, the cool logic of the lawyers vanished, replaced by primal fear. 6 women were burned alive. 5 more were burned in effigy. They had already died in prison. The evidence was the testimony of children and the hysterical confessions of tortured neighbors. But look at the demographics. These were women who lived on the margins, healers, midwives, women who knew the properties of herbs. The Inquisition targeted them not because they were actually flying on broomsticks, but because they represented an alternative power structure. The village healer held power over life and death. To the church, that power belonged only to God. The witch trials were a brutal reminder. In a patriarchal theocracy, any female knowledge that is not sanctioned by the church is treated as a threat. And the terror did not stop at the water's edge. When Spain colonized the Americas, they brought the cross, the sword, and the tribunal. The Inquisition set up courts in Mexico City, Lima, and Cartagena. But the horror in the New World had a different flavor. It was the horror of isolation. If you were arrested in Seville, your family might be down the street. You had networks. If you were arrested in Mexico City, you were thousands of miles from help. You were in a colony where the law was often just the whim of the viceroy and the inquisitor. The journey itself was a trap. Conversos fled to the New World, hoping to escape the eyes of the Holy Office. They thought the jungle would hide them. They were wrong. The Inquisition had a global reach. They sent commissaries to remote mining towns in the Andes. They monitored the ports. A woman could run to the edge of the known world, and the Green Cross would still be waiting for her. Let us focus on the most heartbreaking case in the history of the Mexican Inquisition, the Carvajal family. They were a prominent family. Luis de Carvajal was the governor of Nuevo León, but they were secret Jews. The women of the family, Isabel, the mother, and her daughters, Isabel, Leonor, and Catalina, were the spiritual core. In the wilds of Mexico, they maintained the Sabbath, they fasted, they sang the Psalms of David while walking through the cornfields. They thought they were safe. But the Inquisition in Mexico needed a show trial. They needed to prove their authority. The entire family was arrested. Imagine the torture chamber in the sweltering heat of Mexico City. Young Isabel de Carvajal was tortured until she broke. She implicated her entire family, her brothers, her sisters, her mother. The letters of Isabel de Carvajal, written from prison on scraps of avocado wrapping paper using lemon juice as ink, are some of the most moving documents of the era. She writes of her faith. She writes of her despair. She calls herself a lamb in the wolf's mouth. She tried to commit suicide in her cell to avoid the auto da fe, but failed. On December 8, 1596, the Carvajal women were taken to the Great Plaza in Mexico City. It was a spectacle for the colony. The viceroys, the Aztec nobility, the Spanish settlers, everyone was there. The women were burned alive. They died reciting the Shema, the Jewish prayer of faith, their voices rising above the crackle of the flames and the tropical birds. They had crossed an ocean to be free, only to find the same fire waiting for them on the other side. In the colonies, the corruption of the Inquisition was even more blatant than in Spain. Far from the oversight of the Supreme Council in Madrid, the inquisitors in Peru behaved like kings. And this brings us to the sexual predation. In Lima, the Inquisition was notorious. We have records of inquisitors who used their power to procure women. If an inquisitor desired the wife of a merchant, he could arrest the merchant on a trumped-up charge of heresy. With the husband in the dungeons, the wife was vulnerable. Or he could arrest the woman herself. Come to my chambers for an audience. In the isolation of the Lima tribunal, there was no one to hear her scream. The secret prison became a private harem for corrupt officials. If the woman became pregnant, she mysteriously died of fever or was silenced. This was the ultimate perversion of the Holy Office. It wasn't about faith. It wasn't about God. It was about men with absolute power in a lawless land taking what they wanted. The Inquisition officially ended in the 19th century. The prisons were opened. The racks were destroyed. But trauma does not end when the torture stops. It travels through the blood. In the American Southwest, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, there are families who have lit candles on Friday nights for 400 years. They didn't know why. They just knew Grandma did it. They didn't eat pork. They swept the floor toward the center of the room. They covered the mirrors when someone died. They were Catholics, they went to Mass, but they carried the rituals of the Conversas in their muscle memory. Only recently, with the advent of DNA testing and open archives, have these people realized who they are. They are the descendants of the women who survived. They are the children of the Inquisition. When we look back at the Inquisition, we often focus on the numbers, how many burned, how many tortured. But we must focus on the intent.
The goal was to create a monolithic society, one faith, one mind, one blood. And the primary obstacle to that goal was the woman who remembered the old songs, the woman who washed the body of the dead, the woman who whispered to her daughter that she was a daughter of Israel or a daughter of the Moors. The Inquisition tried to break the woman to save the state. They burned her body, they stole her property, they demonized her sexuality, but they failed. They failed because the kitchen is stronger than the court, the whisper is stronger than the shout, and the secret hidden in the heart of a mother is stronger than the fire. The walls of the Inquisition prisons are crumbling today. They are museums, but the descendants of Beatrice, of Isabel, of the Moriscas, they are still here. They are the living proof that while you can burn a person, you cannot burn a memory.